Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking up with Avengers Volume 7, The Age of Khonshu. And this is the return of Moon Knight, and what's probably one of the most epic returns ever for a particular character. Here's the thing about Moon Knight. Moon Knight is one of these characters where Marvel hasn't really been using him very often. And in fact, we really haven't seen a lot from him since the end of Jeff Lemire's run. Now, the importance of Lemire's run, which I don't think we ever really finished, I thought we did. And then people had asked me on Twitter if I was ever going to finish it. And I was actually streaming on Twitch one day, twitch.tv/comicsexplained. And people were like, no man, you never finished it. And I was like, huh, well, that's kind of wild. But nonetheless, so we need to finish that at some point. But the importance of Jeff Lemire's run is it kind of consolidated all the different personalities of Mark Spector down into him basically kind of coming to an understanding and basically recognizing his different personalities and not really curing his mental health, but improving it in a lot of different ways. The important thing about this is we're not going to do this first part in the way it was actually written because I think it's a little confusing here. Instead, what we're going to do is kind of skip forward a bit and sort of pick up with the second part of the story to a degree. But essentially, Mark Spector had been experiencing these kind of dark visions, basically, right? These kind of nightmarish visions of devils conquering the world and wiping out humanity and all that kind of stuff. And his initial thought was that Khonshu was the one who was causing it. And so he essentially, Moon Knight ended up traveling to the Temple of Khonshu, and then when he got in there, ended up finding out Khonshu was experiencing these same visions as well, of devils conquering and attacking and so on and so forth. And so seemingly the two guys started working together. Now what it does is it picks up in Kunlun, right? In the temple, or I guess the location where Iron Fist Danny Rand spends his time when he's not, out doing superhero antics. And one thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to Moon Knight, well, he does have three different personalities, right? You got Mark Spector, you got Steve Grant, you got Jake Lockley, and they all play different roles, right? Steve Grant's the super rich one, Mark Spector is the mercenary, and then Jake Lockley's kind of like his cab driver, ear to the ground to find out what's going on in the street level sort of persona. His powers or his abilities kind of expand or get stronger when he's in the presence of a full moon. Now, for the most part, his powers are not all that grandiose, right? It's not like, when kind of bestowed with the abilities of that Khonshu gave him, that when he's in the presence of a full moon, he has telepathy, telekinesis, stuff like that. It's really more just improvements to strength, right? He can just become increasingly stronger. The difference here is that at the moment right now, you have what's called a supermoon, and this basically amplifies his powers even further, right? So it's almost kind of like Moon Knight hulking out to an extension, if you want to try to find some, in Marvel Comics, metaphor, kind of example for what's happening here. But the funny thing about this is that he's able to initially and eventually overcome the Iron Fist Danny Rand. And he basically beats this guy into the ground and then essentially steals his power, right? He uses what's essentially an ankh around his neck and steals his power of the Iron Fist. Following that, he travels to Greenwich Village and the Sanctum Sanctorum of Doctor Strange. This is a little murkier here, right? It's not nearly as easy to steal this power as it is with Iron Fist, because all you have to do is overpower Iron Fist. Instead, what you ended up getting were effectively the priests of Khonshu who were sent there beforehand to kind of distract Stephen Strange, which allowed Moon Knight to sneak in and then of course hit him with one of the ankhs and then steal his power as well, right? To steal the power of Stephen Strange. And so in turn, he travels to Hill Rock Heights in East LA, and then he encounters, doesn't really even have a direct encounter with Robbie Reyes in so much as he basically uses one of the ankhs to siphon off and steal the power of Robbie Reyes, right? So basically he has the power of the Ghost Rider, drives a car, and then of course takes off with it. And so following that, he ends up traveling to Wakanda with the intention of stealing the power of Black Panther. The difference here is that with Black Panther, it's not as simple as stealing the power of other individuals, right? Because those powers are external, essentially. With Iron Fist, he has the power of the Iron Fist, but that is a power source that can be taken away. When it comes to Stephen Strange, he basically has the ability to manipulate the powers of others. So with him, you're basically kind of stealing knowledge for, in effect. With somebody like Robbie Reyes, you're taking the spirit of vengeance away from him, but it's like taking somebody's clothes or somebody's keys or somebody's car. When it comes to Black Panther, his power's in his blood. And this comes by way of Moon Knight presenting a kind of ankh, the same one that he used, or at least, the same kind that he used on the other characters that we've seen so far, and it doesn't work. Because with Black Panther, the power's in his blood, right? He consumes the heart-shaped herb. Those powers merge with his body's physical form. And so the only way to steal the power of Black Panther is to literally take all of his blood, right? It's to kill him and take every ounce of his blood. And so that's when you kind of have this bit of a stare down here, and he says, you're going to have to take all of me. Let's go. Like take me to Khonshu, and then we'll figure it out from there, right? And so, you know, at this point, it's really more Black Panther trying to understand the bigger picture, right? Kind of allowing himself to be captured in order to find out what it is that Mark Spector is doing, because by this point, word of what Moon Knight's done has reached his ears, right? Stealing powers of Doctor Strange, of the rest of the Avengers, or at least of Robbie Reyes and Iron Fist. He's like, okay, there's some kind of treachery afoot. There's obviously a bigger game going on here. We got to find out what's happening. Now, the next thing is interesting, but also kind of cooking the books, in the sense that with Mjolnir, because of the fact that Mjolnir is forged out of Uru, it is essentially forged out of what's moon rock, for lack of a better word. And Moon Knight, being bestowed with the powers of Khonshu, is able to manipulate moon rock, i.e. he can control Mjolnir. Now, this is kind of Jason Aaron making up something on the spot, because the big question to ask here is that if this was the case, why have we never seen it before? And if I'm being honest, I'm not familiar with any instance whereby Moon Knight has been able to overpower Thor's hammer and in fact stop it in midair to control the material itself. Now, this is kind of an indirect explanation. Can Magneto control Thor's hammer? And using this, it seems that you can. If you can control the properties that make up the hammer, you can control the hammer itself. And of course, the hammer is made of metal, meaning Magneto controls metal, Magneto can control the hammer. This really kind of offers an explanation into how that can be done. It's not direct, right? So you couldn't really use it as a credible source. You couldn't say like, well, I mean, you know, if you kind of look at this and you look at that and using the transitive property, it kind of works. It doesn't really work that way, right? I mean, when it comes to knowing what a character can do, you really kind of have to go with like a 1-to-1 ratio. But in this particular instance, the fact that it's made of moon rock, and because there's a supermoon and that it enhances the powers of Moon Knight, he in turn is able to control Thor's hammer. He uses it to overpower Thor, and then he takes it. Of course, he ends up summoning a whole bunch of different moons from across the cosmos, you know, from various systems out there, brings them to Earth, and then just kind of pummels Thor, you know, using these moons. And that's basically it, right? Kind of pulling them together and then basically crushing Thor to a degree. Thor, of course, isn't dead, but this is essentially what Khonshu sent Moon Knight on a mission for, was to overpower the various Avengers. The last thing is that Black Panther cannot be broken. He can't be broken in the traditional sense, which is to say, to have him willingly give his blood over to Khonshu. And so because of that, he's more or less just kind of being held captive. The Phoenix Force still exists out there, but is currently untethered. And then of course, there's the Star Brand entity. Now the Star Brand, as we've seen in previous Avengers videos, had bonded itself to a little kid, right? To a little girl. And the Avengers are just basically monitoring this Star Brand just to make sure that, you know, this little girl doesn't go nuts and wipe out, you know, all living things on the face of the earth. But the kind of question to be asked here is, what's the whole motivation behind this in the first place, right? Is it really just devils? Well, if it's devils that are supposedly supposed to be taking over everything, then there's only one person to go to if you're concerned about devils doing bad things. And that, of course, is Mephisto. And so they end up traveling to the Hotel Inferno. Now, this is where Mephisto's been since the events of Marvel Comics' Damnation storyline, where he was basically locked here by Stephen Strange. This was really just Marvel kind of sweeping Mephisto under the rug and putting him on the back burner. And it was really Marvel kind of saying, he's there, he's in this location, we'll bring him back at some point in time, use him for some kind of particular ends. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Mephisto in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It kind of makes sense. Otherwise, none of this damnation never would have happened. He would just be in the hellscape somewhere and just kind of locked away. It was also partially done in order to tell a story whereby Johnny Blaze could take control of hell instead of Mephisto, right? To kind of, you know, usurp Mephisto's control over this realm. But basically, they end up, you know, kind of entering into this place, right? That using the power of Stephen Strange through the ink around Moon Knight's neck, that he basically releases the bars. And then in turn, he uses the power of Thor's hammer to punch a hole through Mephisto and effectively kill him, right? Now, the funny thing about this is, keep in mind, Mephisto is the representation of pure evil, right? He's a representation of evil in its most pure sense. Mephisto can never truly die. But this isn't one of these things where we're talking about like Darkseid in DC Comics, right? Like true form Darkseid, if there really even is such a thing. The idea of that is it really is just kind of evil incarnate. With Mephisto, he represents Hell Lords, but he's not a definitive Hell Lord, meaning he's not necessarily Satan from Judeo-Christianity. And he's certainly not the one below all, right? We know that the one below all is what is in essence absolute evil in Marvel Comics, if from what we've seen in Al Ewing's Incredible Hulk or Immortal Hulk run is to be believed. So Mephisto's just kind of a Hell Lord who's there. But Mephisto's immortality comes in the form of resurrection, which is to say, no matter how many times you kill him, he'll always come back, right? So he's not necessarily by any means gone forever. But what this does do is it really kind of picks up 2 weeks after that, and it basically shows that Khonshu has used the power at his disposal that was given to him by Moon Knight, right? So the inks belonging, or that contain the power of Stephen Strange and those different guys, to basically create what's called Thebes City, you know, that was formerly on the island of Manhattan. Now, here's the issue with something like this. Marvel Comics used to be, they used to write their stories in such a way to where the only time you would see something like this significant on a huge scale, is if there was a crossover. Now, that was back in the 70s and the 80s. A lot of things have changed, right? especially during the late 90s going into the early 2000s. This kind of act wouldn't normally be reserved for a crossover back in the day, right? Marvel used to be very similar to DC. DC wouldn't do this, for example, right? You wouldn't see something like this. You would see it, but you would see it referenced in other comics. You don't really see it referenced in anybody else's comic, right? It's not as though we've been reading Swords of X and it's like, meanwhile, in Manhattan, the entire island's been turned into a giant shrine for Khonshu, the Egyptian god of the moon. Like, it's not really something that you saw, right? So it's one of these things where you kind of have to play it fast and loose. And I simply say that because a lot of you guys are probably going to ask, why haven't we seen this in anybody else's books? Because it's just kind of how things are being done, right? Like almost every single individual comic has its own major event going on, which really is one of the things that people kind of get burned out on, right? When everything seems like a big deal. The reality is that when you write what are effectively villain of the week stories, people get bored, right? So Marvel's really just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And so far, this is kind of what sticks. And so from there, you basically switch over to Black Panther. And the belief of T'Challa is that Moon Knight is not operating of his own accord, right? He's not operating of his own mind. Now, the other part of this is that the servants of Khonshu are trying to get Black Panther to basically acquiesce, right? They're trying to break him. They got him chained up. They're basically, whipping him with basically, or at least flogging him, right? With these whips that contain jagged moonstones, just literally trying to break this guy down on the most basic level. But as we know with T'Challa, the guy never gives up, right? Like, the guy never ever backs down. The willpower of T'Challa is absolutely insane. And so when Moon Knight shows up here and it's just, when T'Challa's like, why are you doing this? Like, Khonshu, like, we have to find a way to get Khonshu out of your head. The response of Moon Knight is, no, I've had these visions of devils conquering the world. Khonshu's had the exact same villains. We're working together to save you guys, and we need to take your power in order to do it, right? So it's not really as though this is kind of an evil thing. And that's one of the things to understand about this, right? That Khonshu has historically manipulated Moon Knight, tricked him, used him for his own ends. But this instance, it really is different here, right? It really is different in some ways. They're going about it in all the worst possible ways, but it really is different in these particular ways. But it's really more or less Mark Spector saying, look, I'm not being mind controlled, right? Like, I'm doing this of my own accord. Like, I'm doing this because I choose to, because it's what we need to do in order to save everyone. The other part of this is that Moon Knight doesn't fully trust Khonshu. And it kind of makes sense just because of the shady history they have together. And this comes in the form of Black Panther kind of continually trying to get him to understand none of this is a good idea, right? Nothing that you're doing here is beneficial, and so on and so forth. And that's when Mark Spector says, like, I'm not blind to what I've done, right? I understand the significance of turning on people who have historically been my teammates, even if we haven't necessarily teamed up all the time, and even if we fought before, right? Like, I understand the significance of what I'm doing, and I haven't given Khonshu all the powers in my possession. I'm not blindly following this guy. And he basically reveals that he's in possession of the Phoenix Force, right? Like, he's got the Phoenix Force at his disposal, and he ends up revealing here that, of course, he's still in possession of the Ghost Rider's powers, right? Which are not small. And that's one of the things to kind of keep in mind. The Ghost Rider is one of these guys where it's so easy to throw him to kind of sweep him under the rug, right? And to assume that there's not much the Ghost Rider has to offer in terms of abilities, right? That he's just kind of a guy who's there. The cool thing about Ghost Rider is he's exceedingly powerful, right? Like, he's powerful enough to take on all kinds of different guys. And in fact, Ghost Riders face off against Galactus before. So it's not like it's a really small amount of power, right? It's not like you become the Ghost Rider and you can lift like 3 tons. It's not like that, right? It's basically the power of a god. It's the power of the devil being used, for any number of goals and achievements or whatever it is that you want to do. The other part of this is that with the binds around Black Panther kind of being weakened, when the various servants come back in with the intention of literally trying to break him down again by whipping him, he literally breaks out of his chains and then starts beating the crap out of him, right? So, like, at that point they kind of flee and ask Khonshu to save them. Now, pick up with Iron Man and pick up with Carol Danvers, right? They've got the little kid Starbrand with them. They're trying to keep this little kid away from Khonshu as best they can. But for Iron Man, he sees this as like a very personal mission that he has to go on, right? Because remember, when we talked about the previous story that we had of Iron Man being stuck in the past with the Avengers 1 million, when he was eventually presented with the Time Stone by Mephisto, and Mephisto brought him back to the modern day, that he kind of saw a little bit of these visions. And so this is going to be kind of an important thing because that's the role he's playing. We'll find out a little bit more about why that matters here in a minute. But the big thing about this is that, again, with Mephisto, because of the fact that he always comes back, you end up having like these different iterations of Mephisto manifesting, right? One who's like a pirate, right, brandishing these revolvers with hellfire bullets that can pierce souls, different things like that, just kind of popping back up here and there. And it's basically Khonshu just constantly killing Mephisto. Now, to be honest with you guys, I don't really believe Khonshu's powerful enough to kill Mephisto, right? Mephisto is a universal entity. He's wildly powerful, in his own way. The way in which they were able to kill him before, the longer Mephisto stays away from his realm among the Hell Lords, the weaker he gets. So it would make sense, like when they visited him in that cell, they could actually kill him, but when he manifests, he should be as powerful as he could possibly be, and that's no small thing, right? This guy's nuts in terms of his power. Khonshu was never really being shown to be that powerful before, but he's also a character that we haven't really seen that much before, and so in a lot of ways, Jason Aaron is kind of flying by the seat of his pants with the power that Khonshu possesses and what it is that he can do, right? So I guess it's kind of believable in that way because we don't really have much to tell us that it shouldn't be done, but regardless, what Khonshu's been doing is basically killing all these versions of Mephisto that keep manifesting, right? Every time one comes back, and there's been, you know, a little over 100 so far, every time, you know, Mephisto comes back, Khonshu fights him and then kills him, right? It's just kind of been going on consistently. At the same time, you've got Captain America, you've got Blade, and you've got She-Hulk, who were launching an effort to find like Danny Rand, you know, the Iron Fist, trying to find Stephen Strange, those individuals whose powers were taken by Khonshu and whose Khonshu's forces had kind of, you know, basically taken into hiding or you know, kind of removed them from the landscape. Now, the reason why this matters is because in an effort to entrap the rest of the Avengers, the forces of Khonshu kind of let it slip that like these guys were going to be on this train, right? Stephen Strange, Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, Robbie Reyes, that they were going to be on this train. Captain America and his team took the bait and then basically rescued these guys, right? That leads to the forces of Khonshu showing up and then all hell kind of breaking loose among these various forces here. At the same time that happens, Moon Knight actually ends up going directly after Iron Man and Carol Danvers, right? And there's a little bit of bickering here. It's kind of funny, you know, watching like Tony Stark, who's kind of an idiot trying to take care of a kid, which he's completely ill-equipped to do, but he recognizes the significance of this kid and recognizes the significance of what could happen if the visions of Khonshu and Moon Knight are actually correct. And so there's a point whereby Moon Knight shows up here, he captures Carol Danvers and then goes to attack, or at least goes to try to take the baby away from Tony Stark using the power of the Ghost Rider, and then basically says like basically makes mention and saying that like, you know, everything that we fought for is going to die, right? You have to let me finish what I started or everything's going to die if we let Mephisto win. And the fact that he references Mephisto tells Tony Stark this ties into his whole experience, right? And we'll have that video down in the description in case you guys want to get caught up. I don't want you guys to feel left out or anything, but in that moment, because of the fact that this kind of goes towards quite literally stopping Mephisto and these kind of devils more or less that seem to be popping up, again, we don't really know if that's actually the case. We're largely just kind of assuming alongside Moon Knight and Khonshu that he initially was going to give the kid over to Moon Knight. That in turn basically leads to Carol Danvers kind of freeing herself, jumping in, grabbing Tony Stark and the baby and flying away, right? And Tony Stark's like, do not let me near him again. And like, do not let me near this baby again. Like, take this baby and fly away as far as you can, right? Because if something like if this happens again, I will end up giving this kid to Moon Knight, right? I don't want to, but I'm driven to, right? Like I kind of have this drive to. And so of course with Black Panther freeing himself from the various guys who are out there, you know, freeing himself from the priests of Khonshu, he goes to basically confront Khonshu himself, right? To confront this guy himself. Now, the reason why this is kind of important here is because in this moment when Moon Knight had basically kind of been left, right? With Carol Danvers grabbing Iron Man and the baby and then flying away, that in an effort to kind of understand whether or not Khonshu was telling him the truth, he ended up going to the moon, right? For a moment of solitude, just kind of staying there and just kind of thinking for a minute or two. And he's met by the Unseen. Now, for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with this guy, because it's been a long time since we really covered him, the Unseen is classic Nick Fury from back in the day, right? Like old school white guy Nick Fury that you guys know who he is, right? Like here's a picture of what he looks like of old school Nick Fury. Right? This is a picture of what he looks like. You know him when you see him. But the idea was that during the original Sin story arc back in 2014 or whatever it was written as part of the lead up to Hickman's Avengers, New Avengers, and eventually Secret Wars. Then of course we'll have that in the description as well. That whole playlist. My editors, whoever this is, will post this down in the description. The idea behind that was that Nick Fury had basically killed the Watcher in order to cover his own tracks for something that he had done. The result of this is that when it came out that Nick Fury was the one who had done it, the other Watchers banded together and then confined him to the moon, right? So no one really knows he's there. I mean, some do here and there, like people who kind of go by there happen to see him, something like that. But he's basically confined for essentially all existence to stay locked and chained to the moon and able to witness everything that happens on Earth, but being unable to do anything about it, right? Now, even then, he's still pretty ambiguous. I mean, it makes it clear, Jason Aaron makes it very, very clear, Nick Fury as we knew him is long since dead. And it's basically just the Unseen as he calls himself. But what he basically tells Moon Knight here is, you've been praying to Khonshu all this time, but if you're going to win this, you can't pray to him. You're the only one who can really end this. You cannot pray to Khonshu anymore. You have to learn to pray to a different god. And when you do that, when you give yourself over fully to that god, then in turn, you'll possess the kind of power that you need in order to essentially save the day. And so what you end up getting here is you kind of jump back to Black Panther confronting Khonshu and ultimately being met by Moon Knight. Now, Moon Knight had come back here with the intention of confronting Khonshu himself, but in the recognition that Black Panther was here and realizing that with these these two teaming up, that most likely Khonshu would have to be forced to flee, that this led to Khonshu using the power of Doctor Strange to trick the mind of Moon Knight into believing that Black Panther was Mephisto. And so literally, it's an illusion. And so Moon Knight's just fighting against this guy as best as he possibly can. Now, ultimately, this fight drags on pretty far, and it's kind of interesting to see this, to be honest with you guys. I mean, one of the funny things that happens is that Khonshu throws the hammer of Mjolnir at Black Panther, and Black Panther like catches it and then like literally shows that like he's worthy of lifting it. The funny thing is he doesn't use it, and that's kind of, see, that is how it needs to be done. Like in my mind, showing a person's worthy of wielding Mjolnir is one thing, but like when you show they're worthy and then you in turn use that worthy, and that person picks up the hammer and then starts fighting, it kind of cheapens it. You're like, yeah, I'm worthy of using it, but I don't need it, right? Like I can do this on my own, which is kind of an important thing, right? It's a cool little moment there, because what you end up getting is that with this illusion being cast and Moon Knight facing off against Black Panther tries to reason with him as best he can, but Black Panther also ends up putting the full might of his martial arts literally on display here, right? The flying leopard claw kick, the black mamba spine strike, the hippo fist, which is kind of an interesting name for a martial arts move, but like the fist of Khonshu, which Moon Knight tries to use on Black Panther and it doesn't work, right? He just basically overcomes. Like one of the coolest names here is the Rage of Many Wildebeest. That's an amazing name for like an assault. I think it's cool. But basically Black Panther is able to get the upper hand on Moon Knight and then incapacitate him. Now, the reason why this matters is because Moon Knight had long since realized he was under the spell of an illusion, right? That he was under the spell of Khonshu using the power of Stephen Strange, and basically says like, you're gonna have to make me bleed. Like you're gonna have to like pummel me, if I'm going to succeed here. It's a little bit ambiguous, but we basically end up realizing that in doing this, he's basically casting off the influence of Khonshu and casting off his faith and belief in Khonshu. The reason why this matters is because it in turn allows the Phoenix Force to bind itself to Moon Knight. Now, again, the Phoenix is part of the original Avengers, right? And that's really the power source that Khonshu was going after. The power of all the original Avengers, right? The Avengers 1 million BC. That you had basically Mjolnir, which was being used by Odin. That you had the Phoenix Force. You had the first Black Panther. You had like the first Starbrand, or really the second Starbrand. The first one was a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but like you had the second Starbrand. That's what the power that Khonshu was going after, the power of the original Avengers, to destroy whatever threat this was that was coming towards Earth. But Moon Knight absorbing the totality of the Phoenix Force unto himself and then taking off into space really kind of changes things, because the truth about this is this feels like it should be a major crossover event, a lot more significant than what you would see in a story like this, but at the same time, it is also the Avengers comics. And under normal circumstances, if we were talking about the Avengers comics 15 years ago, it wouldn't be this big, right? It wouldn't be like a massive spacefaring event with like a person being imbued with the full power of the Phoenix Force and then like going to town on like an Egyptian god of the sun. You wouldn't really see that. Ever since the Marvel Cinematic Universe and like the first Avengers movie, there's always kind of been this demand in comics to amp things up, right? To make like the Avengers as big in comics as they are in the movies. Kind of this expectation that coming from those movies and sitting down and reading an Avengers comic, you're going to see like these insane story arcs. And that's really where we are now, right? That's why the Avengers comics are being written this way, because it's kind of what people expect after having gone and see the movies. That's one of the drawbacks of the movies, right? Because you end up seeing a removal of character-driven stories, and instead it focuses on like big high-octane action events, which there's not always room to do both. In this one there is, but there's not always room to do both of that across the board. And that's kind of the problem that you run into. If you have to choose one, which one do you choose? But Moon Knight showing up here and beating the crap out of Khonshu after realizing that he's basically being manipulated leads to, of course, the attempt of him to take the Starband child away from Iron Man and Carol Danvers, only to be declined, and then to say, okay, fine, then get the kid out of here, right? Like, I don't mean any harm to this kid. This kid wants to screw me up. And the whole point of the Starbrand's power is to be powerful enough to overcome any foe he faces off against. Hence the reason why in Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, one Starbrand was able to destroy one Beyonder because it was facing off against one Beyonder at the time. It ended up destroying the entirety of the Starbrand, right? He ended up having to kill himself, or at least he was already dying, but he ended up destroying his physical body, in order to actually destroy that one Beyonder. But like, it would be enough power to take out Mark Spector if that baby had full control of the Starbrand's power. But the fight between these two guys, where you end up having, Khonshu basically knocked back down to the surface, the response of Khonshu is to tell his forces, amass as many of yourselves as you can, right? Like, the full totality of my forces, face off against these guys here. I will deal with Moon Knight out in space as best I can. The problem with that is that as soon as he starts to come to, you end up having the arrival of Robbie Reyes. And Robbie Reyes and Black Panther end up taking the angst of Khonshu and taking their power. And taking the power from Khonshu and then giving it basically to different Avengers, right? Stephen Strange is still knocked out, Robbie Reyes has come to, and so you end up seeing this power being given to like She-Hulk, who ends up becoming the new Iron Fist, Blade, who becomes the new Sorcerer Supreme, and then of course Robbie Reyes ends up getting his own getting his Ghost Rider power back. Now it's not going to stay this way, but it is kind of a cool little shift up, you know, even if only in the moment, to see this kind of thing go down. The problem with this is that while you have Mark Spector out, you know, kind of hovering above the earth with the power of the Phoenix Force, he starts to realize this power is too much for him to control, and it's literally sending his mental illness into disarray. Because remember, the Phoenix Force really seems to kind of go nuts if it starts experiencing emotions or concepts that it didn't experience before. That was the whole idea behind the Dark Phoenix saga. The Phoenix Force started experiencing jealousy, rage, you know, different emotions that the Phoenix had never really been privy to, and experiencing those sent it on this dark and twisted path where like it corrupted Jean Grey and just kind of went nuts. In this instance, the Phoenix Force is experiencing multiple personality disorder. If it stayed bonded to Mark Spector enough, it could actually drive the Phoenix Force insane. But in this instance, Mark begins to realize the Phoenix Force is making his mental illness worse. And so in order to essentially overcome it, when Thor reemerges from all these worlds that have kind of been crushed together to keep him held apart, to keep him in stasis, he summons his hammer back to him, realizing that his hammer's close, and then like pummels Moon Knight and sends him crashing back down to Earth. You know, he ends up pummeling Moon Knight. The Phoenix Force leaves Moon Knight, kind of goes back out, does whatever it is that it's going to do, but in that moment, he's more or less defeated. Following that, you end up having, you know, Moon Knight kind of crash landing on Earth, Phoenix Force takes off, Khonshu wakes up, and then Khonshu's in turn apprehended by the Avengers, but not before saying, I did all of this in order to like protect the world from that threat, right? From these devils that are going to invade. You're not going to have the power for that. But the response to the Avengers is, then we'll find that power ourselves, right? But it's not the job of some moon god who's more or less, you know, kind of gone nuts to take that role unto himself, right? Like, you know, even though he was coming from a place of altruism, it's not the best thing. The other question that really comes out of this is what's going to happen with the Phoenix Force? If any of you guys had read Jason Aaron's, basically his Thor run, you end up finding out at a future point in time, Wolverine bonds to the Phoenix Force. And that really is kind of what he seems to be pointing out here, right? That where you end up having Jean Grey, who was kind of watching all that go down, that is kind of like, okay, like something's coming, right? Jean Grey recognizes the Phoenix Force is coming again, right? The Phoenix Force is out there on Earth and it's looking for a suitable host. And where Jean Grey says it's not looking for me, then the question is, who is it looking for? And while we're not necessarily given a definitive answer here, it looks like it's going to end up bonding itself to Wolverine. We'll find out whether that's true or not, but that's what it looks like it's gonna do. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. I will catch you all later. Peace.